Okay, friends, I think we can move a little farther here. We're on program number 49, page 242 of Letters on Occult Meditation. We've just considered meditation and color in relation to the environment, and now we have a new section, the application of color in healing. Okay, we are dealing with the subject now from the standpoint of meditation. It is essential, therefore, that we consider the subject from that angle. In meditation, the work of healing is handled entirely from the mental standpoint. Okay, we're not so much talking about a hands-on type of healing here, or if we are, the mind is certainly the guide. The direction of any force supplied will be from the mental body of the patient and will work from thence to the physical via the emotional. All right. So we're using the patient's own energies and not only the energies of the would-be healer. This involves, on the part of the person or group that undertakes this work, the ascertaining of certain facts. And let us briefly enumerate in order to clarify the mind of the reader. So he's reminding us that, I think not only can an individual be a healer, but a group can, and not only can an individual be healed, but a group can be healed. So what are these facts that have to be ascertained? The work will be largely subjective and will deal with causes and not effects, with effects. The primary aim of the healing group will be to discover the originating cause of the trouble, and having located that cause in either the emotional or mental body, where it is more likely to be found, thence precipitating into the etheric and physical, so where this cause is more likely to be found, then the members of the group will then proceed to deal with the effect as demonstrated in the etheric, physical or etheric body. All right, so that's where the effects do work out in one of those vehicles. Should the trouble be entirely physical, such as is the case in an accident of any kind, or some affliction which is purely the result of heredity or of congenital trouble, the ordinary high-class physical plane scientific methods will be applied first, and the work of the healers will be to aid those methods through concentration on the subtler bodies. So the cause has to be determined and the origin, and it is possible that there be a strictly physical cause. For instance, in a car accident or skiing accident, some sort of collision, let's say, where a part of the body is traumatized. So this method, the scientific methods, physical plane scientific methods, ordinary, high class physical plane scientific methods, that is, the best methods that are achievable on the strictly physical plane through methods that are not necessarily occult, they will be applied first. So this approach, this applies during the transition period into the race into which the race is now entering. And I think I want to emphasize that, because we are in a transition and we are not yet in the Aquarian age, certainly not at the time that this was written, and even now we are not. Almost another 100 years remains until the year 2117, when we will have specific alignment, a specific alignment bringing us into the Aquarian age technically and according to astronomy. Later, when the knowledge of occult healing is more familiar and the laws which govern the subtle bodies are more known, maybe not completely known, physical plane science will be superseded by the preventive science of the subtler planes, that science which aims at the provision of right conditions and the building of bodies that are both self-protecting and neutral to all attacks or all attack. So it seems like even trauma to the physical body per se, i.e. through accidents, can be offset when there is a preventive science of the subtler planes. And this is interesting, building bodies that are self-protecting and neutral to attack. Are we talking strictly about maybe diseases such as the epidemic which is now raging throughout the world and especially in the United States? Okay. It will be found that the comprehension of the law of vibration and the effect of one vibration upon another vibration holds the key to establishing of better conditions of living and of sound bodies on all planes. Well, he links this elsewhere with coming in of the seventh ray. And he says it will be responsible for the building of more vital physical bodies and more resilient, I suppose, because more etherically charged. But as things are now, and of course a master has to write in time and space and take into consideration present conditions, not only ideal conditions, but as things are now, disease, corruption of different kinds, and trouble in all the bodies is everywhere contacted. And when conditions are thus recognized, means of aiding must be earnestly sought. So he takes into consideration exactly how things are now. And remember, this was even before the discovery of antibiotics, when they came into considerable use in the early 1940s, I think. Then there was a whole new method of protecting against attacks of a bacterial and viral kind, and attacks which were the infecting of wounds and the infecting of surgeries. The surgery may have been successful, but the onset of bacterial infections often cause the demise of the patient. Well, much of that subsided with the discovery and application of the of the antibiotic gamut of drugs. So this leads us on to our next point, he tells us. And let's see, did we have a first point? Yes, the work will be largely subjective and will deal with causes and not effects. That's the first point. In the future, that is. So now let's see about this next point. The ascertaining by the group that practices healing of full information as to the patient based on the following questions. So subjective work and ascertainment of full information. In other words, understanding the condition of the patient. What are his basic lines of thought? Because this certainly predisposes the other and lower vehicles to certain conditions. That is, by what thought forms is he principally surrounded? Let's get this straightened. Okay. So by what thought forms is he principally surrounded? What are his basic lines of thought? What is the predominant hue of his emotional body and its rate of vibration? Well, let's isolate these questions, and we'll look next at the emotional body. Is the patient subject to sudden turmoils that throw the entire emotional body into disorder? And certainly that can be a predisposing cause to various conditions in the etheric body and disruptions in the physical as well. So these are questions that have to be known about the psyche and habit nature. Questions re the psyche and habit nature of the patient. Okay, what else? What are his most ordinary topics of conversation? What are his principal interests? What literature does he study? What are his favorite pursuits? So really, we are learning some psychological detail here, which is not normally considered relevant to the knowledge base of the physician as regards the individual. So the knowledge base is expanding in a psychological manner. What literature does he study? What are his favorite pursuits? His hobbies, his avocations, maybe his vocation, his interests. This all has something to do with the condition of his vehicles. So all these factors condition his vehicles. And what is the condition of the centers in his body? Which centers are awakened? Now, this is requires etheric vision. Are any of the centers rotating in fourth dimensional order as they do prior to initiation? Which center is the major one in any particular case? And this may be related to the disease to be healed. So, a condition of the centers, which would seem, I think, an important piece of esoteric knowledge. Okay. And what is the state of the etheric body in general, I guess? Does it show symptoms of devitalization or of congestion? Is the patient lacking in vitality? What is the value of his magnetic action on other people? You know, we might say, what does he attract from others, or perhaps share with others? So, the state of the etheric body. These, you know, a broad knowledge, a broad and deep knowledge of the patient is really required. And this is perhaps much different than the knowledge base now seemingly required. These things are generally to the physically attentive physician considered somewhat irrelevant. Maybe the question of the centers and the general condition of the body of vitality will be considered physically relevant, but the psychological factors, well, not so much. So this is the question of full information as to the patient. Not only is this subjective work, but full information is required, and the method of simply asking the patient and determining the truthfulness of his responses, as sometimes people do not deal straightly when asked by professionals about these conditions. Having studied the patient from all these angles, and note the word studied, sometimes before doing a horoscope or a ray chart or something of that nature, DK says you must spend about 5 hours thinking about the patient. 5 being the number of the kingdom of the soul. Having studied the patient from all these angles, and not at any earlier time, will the group who purpose purpose healing study, will the group who purpose healing study the physical vehicle itself in detail? But let's say that first, subjective studies are required. Then, with some idea of the inner conditions that underlie the trouble, they will study as follows. And note that it's not just a question of a 15-minute visit to the doctor where he applies something that he applies to all such patients without knowledge of their inner psyche or inner energetic condition. It's something much deeper in the future. So something much deeper than at present is applied, is required in the future, and will develop in the future. Then, after all of these subjective studies coming down to the etheric vehicle, having studied the trend of thought and the reactivity or non-reactivity of the vital body, he talks about turmoils. They seem to be like whirlpools in the emotional body. Then we can get into the dense physical body. That is, after the vital body is studied. The condition of the nervous system, giving particular attention to the spine and to the state of the inner fire. So, chiropractic and naturopathy also are required. And let's see, chiropractors, chiropractry. Well, I'm going to just kind of leave that the way it is, hoping that there is maybe such a word. So I'm reminded of craniosacral therapy. Is that what it's called? Craniosacral therapy. Well, it's pretty much going all along the spine and from the top of the spine to the bottom, and I suppose including something of the head. The state of the various organs of the body, and especially the organ or organs that are causing distress, but they have these organs are distressed due to inner subjective causes. And the structure itself, studying the bones and the flesh and the condition of the vital fluid, the blood. Let's just say this is the last and most physical aspect of the energy system to be studied. So we do see how much we are leaving out of consideration when we come to heal. It's the whole individual that we have to deal with, and not just the physical body. But right now, just as materialism seems to rule many areas of life, so it has a very strong effect upon the way we approach the healing arts or just the practice of medicine, even psychiatry, where we imagine that the morbid psychological states are arising from the condition of the physical body. An epiphenomenon of matter, as if psyche were an epiphenomenon of matter. It is possible, of course, to give certain physical substances which seem to alter the way the psyche expresses, but I'm afraid we have turned everything around so that the true causes of outer conditions are ignored, except by the more progressive physicians. So higher vision and health. Okay, that's a continuation here. of the original subject, which is application of color in healing, but maybe we can consider it somewhat a new subject. I think we will try to treat it that way. And he will demonstrate to us so much of what we're missing to be the complete and true healer. So, this, as you can see, necessarily involves either direct scientific knowledge, or else it involves the faculty of inner vision, which sees the trouble wherever it may be and can clairvoyantly view the entire frame and organs, so locating instantaneously any trouble. Well, not so many. How many can we count that are gifted with this ability, having developed this ability? This capacity presupposes the development of those inner powers which give knowledge in the three worlds, and so obviates the disastrous mistakes which so often eventuate in the modern practice of medicine, as you call the art of healing. So the truer name for what we're doing is the art of healing. And when we talk about the modern practice of medicine, it's perhaps not the best or most complete title. And of course, it's going to take a lot of development on the part of the average intelligent healer to come into this condition. Right now, we're not there, and we have to pretty well wait for the emergence into physical plane practice of the masters and their well-trained initiates. But right now, he does say that in this practice of medicine, which is directed mostly towards the physical body and ignores the subjective causative condition, there are disastrous mistakes. There will not be so much danger of error in the future day of healing. For what I seek to point out is that although those errors will be obviated in the case of the physical body, yet much time must elapse before full comprehension of the emotional body has reached a point where modern science has placed the physical. And so, as yet, nowhere near complete. The healing of the physical body and its due comprehension and study can be carried on by the man who has the inner vision. Well, let me just bring this contrast between the emotional body and the physical body to our attention, and the first to be understood will be the physical body, even as before we can really drive the evil back onto the astral plane, or to maybe rid the astral plane of its very conditioning glamours, we have to clear the etheric levels. And we're given methods of doing that, for instance, in Rule 10 in the rays and the initiations. So we're nowhere near, I think, comprehending the emotional body, but intuitive psychologists probably have a pretty good idea of what to expect, though we don't know that it has been reduced to a reliable science. It's more what occurs to them intuitively that benefits their practice and their ability to help their patient, their client. The healing of the physical body and its due comprehension and study can be carried on by the man who has the inner vision. With his ability to see on emotional levels, he can cooperate with the modern enlightened medical man and thus safeguard him from error, enabling him to judge truly of the extent of the trouble, the seat of distress, its assistance, and the progress of the cure. So we are pointing to healing teams, each member of which has a different responsibility. It'll be interesting to see how they get along. They'll all have to value the subjective approach to healing, but some will know more of the outer mechanism, and some perhaps, it seems, more of the inner, more subtle mechanism. And in all cases, the inner vision will be required. Let's just say even etheric vision would be a great plus. It's still related to an area of vibration which is physical. It's part of the etheric physical plane, but it's more subtle now, or increasingly subtle, when compared with the strictly physical world of effects, given the study of that congestion built upon the etheric body, which we call the dense physical body. So, and then of course we're going to have to add at some point, as the race becomes more mentally focused, the ability to see upon the mental level. Emotional trouble that is working out in the physical body, as is the case with the majority of physical ills, can usually be located and eliminated by a judicious treatment. Okay, well, it's, we're speaking here to an expert healer who knows of the variety of causes and cases. So, yes, one type, this is the type he describes, the majority of physical ills derivative from or derived from the emotional body can be healed, but emotional trouble that is deep-seated in the subtle body has to be dealt with from mental levels, so that it requires a mental psychic to deal with and eliminate it. And all these methods, of course, entail the active conscious cooperation of the patient himself. Now, we're not healing in that wise way yet, it seems to me. Most of what passes for healing, when it's not a totally disgraceful practice, is nowhere near as scientifically understood as DK seems to require. So he's going through, the various areas where cause arises and what type of source for energy is needed to bring the trouble into a state of amelioration. Let's see here. The healing of the physical body and its due comprehension can be carried on by the man who has the inner vision. Yeah. And that is, these methods will not all occur simultaneously, but will be, I think, progressive and come to the attention of the healer in a progressive manner. So we always seem to be, we often seem to be healing, or let's call it directing the healing energy from a point of tension above the area in which the trouble is working out or expressing. We seem to need that point of vantage of a greater perspective on a plane higher, perhaps, than the plane on which the difficulty is manifesting. And now, naturally, he moves on to the mental trouble. Similarly, mental trouble has to be dealt with directly from the causal level and necessitates, therefore, the assistance of the ego and the help of someone who has causal vision and consciousness. So always, it seems, healing proceeds from a higher vantage point. I think there's nothing in this case unexpected. After we work in a progressive manner, we see that the method simply continues. And difficult to say what color to use here. Well, I'll use kind of a green, but orange would be probably the better color. Okay, so this latter method and the major part of these types of trouble lie far ahead for the race, and therefore are of little concern to us at this time. Well, yes, and far ahead can certainly be centuries. You can almost look ahead and see incarnations in the future when this will be highly relevant. These methods. And our methods at that time or our methods presently, will look to us at that time as we look upon the practice of bleeding, practiced just a couple 300 years ago. Nevertheless, the curing of physical ailments that have their seat in the emotional body is already beginning to be known and slightly studied. In the study of psychology and in the comprehension of nervous diseases and troubles and their linking together will come the next step ahead in medical science. Well, psychology was having its kind of heyday at that time. And the idea of psychosomatic medicine was coming in strongly. But as he said, slightly, and not really in an overall scientific paradigm regarding the relation between psyche and soma. The link between the body of the emotions and the physical body is the etheric body. This, we as students of occultism understand. The next immediate step is to consider the etheric body in two ways, either as a transmitter of prana, the life force, vitality or magnetism, or as the vehicle which links the emotional nature to the dense physical. So, two perspectives then upon the dense physical body. The physical invariably follows the behests of that nature as transmitted via the etheric. So first, transmitter of prana, and second, and the life force, or as the vehicle which links the emotional nature. So the emotional nature is very influential in the influencing the condition of the dense physical body via the etheric. And I wonder if those of us who are subject to certain outer ills can trace those ills to an emotional cause. Well, increasingly it will be found capable of ascertainment. And even now, you see attempts made now. We understand, when bringing Chinese medicine into this investigation, a lot of the psyche and soma interrelated. And I'm remembering, that when there is lung trouble and difficulty breathing and so forth, it is related often to depression and sadness of some kind. I mean, there are ways now in which emotional states, whether this is accurate or not, are considered related to undesirable physical states. Well, it's one's whole life. You could spend, of course, a life in the healing arts, no question about it. and it will become at once more subtle, simpler in a way, but a deeper and more effective study in helping to ameliorate conditions to which perhaps wrong practices were applied in the attempt at amelioration. In forming groups for healing, and he says this is, the way of the future. Under ideal conditions, you would have at the head of the group a person with causal consciousness who can deal with any trouble in the mental body and who can study the alignment of all the bodies with the ego. Well, these people have to be trained, and if trained already, they have to appear. And that's where patience comes in. We do understand from various sources in his writings that the Tibetan will be one of those externalizing masters, and he will teach the ancient methods of healing. It's amazing how diverse, how wide his capabilities are in psychology, astrology, in healing, in cosmology, in telepathy, in generally the science of initiation, of course, and of course, as we're learning in this book, in the art of meditation, art and science of meditation. So the group will also include, and here we're learning about the healing team of the future, a person or persons who can clairvoyantly view the subtle body of the emotions. Okay. And that seems necessary and reasonable. A number of people who know somewhat the rudiments of the law of vibration and can definitely, by the power of thought, apply certain waves of color to effect certain cures and bring about, through scientific comprehension, the desired results. We seem to have a hierarchy here, don't we? So the rudiments of the law of vibration, and that is a first ray law in a way, but certainly connected with the seventh ray and the age in which we are entering. And some member of the group will also be a member of the medical profession, who will work with the physical body under the direction of the conscious clairvoyance. He will study the resistance of that body. He will apply certain currents and colors and vibrations which will have a direct physical effect. And by the cooperation of all those units in the group, results will be achieved that will merit the name of miracles. Well, Master Moria has sometimes said, well, are these healing currents real? He says, well, when they're applied, the entire bed may even shake. That's how strong they can be demonstrating. So the healing team, covering causal mental, astral, physical, and well, astrally etheric, I guess we could say. Now, this is far ahead, and DK has almost laid out a curriculum for the entire Aquarian age, but still more will be given, and a very supportive foundation to all these unfoldments in the Aquarian age will have been established. In the group also will be a number of people, notice this group is growing, who can meditate occultly and can, by the power of their meditation, create the necessary funnel for the transmission of the healing forces of the higher self and of the master. So things are not simply focused upon the vehicles. The process is not focused only upon the vehicles. The opening of funnels through meditation, and not a focus only on the vehicles. Now, you know, one has to, over time and training, judge where one is best suited. But you know, the way the nurses and doctors gather around the patient at different times, we can imagine a whole new kind of medical team gathering around the patient and producing really unsuspected results, unsuspected at this time, which will results which will merit the name of miracles. Well, when you apply higher energies to physical conditions and alter those conditions by subtle means, we do call it a miracle, even though there is adherence to unknown laws of nature, unsuspected. I shouldn't say unknown, I should say unsuspected by laws of nature by those who often even accidentally apply these methods. But later it will be a science, and the changes will be expected. Okay, and besides this, in each group will be found some person who can accurately transcribe all that takes place, and so keep records that will prove to be the literature of the new school of medicine. Well, he really is making his plans, isn't he? Astonishingly so. He's making his plans to bring down, and in a form which can be used in medical schools and schools of healing, a form for study, and which will document what has been accomplished. And that we understand why the new schools and why the new schools of the healing arts are still far ahead in the experience of humanity. I wonder, do we have to pass through the Saturnian phase of the Aquarian age and reach into the Mercurian and Venusian phases of the second and third decanates before some of these more subtle mental intuitive methods are applied and in common use? He tells us the beginning of the Aquarian age will be an age of difficulty. He does tell us that. I have touched I have here touched on the ideal group. It is not as yet in any way possible, but a beginning can be made by the utilization of any knowledge and powers that may be found amongst those who seek to serve their race and their master. Well, always, when they talk about a beginning, the masters, it's not a short-term indication. A beginning is often occurring centuries before the manifestation that the beginning indicates. And so again, patience is required. Patience and caution. There are so many ways to run afoul of the law, at least temporarily, without realizing one is doing so. And so every practitioner who seeks to bring heaven to earth and who seeks to see the highest and the lowest meet must proceed with great caution. And as you will note from the above, colors will be applied in two ways. That's been our subject pretty much. Number one, on the subtler planes by the power of thought and by means of colored lights applied to the physical body. Now, already I have seen this done very much with various forms of quite clear crystals and lights of different hues passing through the crystals and being applied generally to the physical body, but also in a more targeted way when people know what they're doing. That's it, the urge to simply do is so strong that one is often not careful enough about what it is that's being done. One races into that kind of application, and the results are not salubrious, not health promoting. Probably before the use of color in thought and in group form is applied, the more external methods will be applied, and then people will become convinced that something of value is indeed happening. On the physical plane, the exoteric color will be applied, whilst on the subtler, the esoteric, if one can visualize it. The esoteric color. But that's an important hint right there, telling us what we must do when our imagination is employed. For instance, well, there are a number of colors, let's say, associated with the fifth ray, or maybe we can say, let's say, with the sixth ray that might be applied to the astral emotional vehicle. We're probably subtly going to avoid applying any kind of thick or murky Martian red to situations. It doesn't seem generally useful unless it's to revive the vitality in some crude manner. Rather, the color rose or the color lighter blue might be applied internally. So we have to remember that when we are sending color. And in general, of course, that is some kind of magnetic healing that requires a lot of specific knowledge. DK encourages us in the Esoteric Healing book to work more generally with the soul of the other and with our own soul. But when we start to direct color internally, it is the esoteric color that we must use. So, and do we easily visualize what that esoteric color may be? Maybe not so easily, because even if we have the general hue, we might not have the exact hue, which he tells us is often very unexpected, and you wonder whether it connects with the outer exoteric color at all. The work, therefore, will be until the esoteric becomes the exoteric, largely in the hands of the occult students of the world, working in organized groups, but under expert supervision. That's what's missing right now. We certainly have disciples who are deeply interested in the matter, but whether they can be called experts is highly doubtful, and expert supervision seems to be lacking at the moment. And DK tells us there are so many things I can't tell you until even in meditation, until the teacher is present to keep you out of trouble, to guide you aright. And if you fall into trouble, to come to the rescue, I suppose. So again, we're on the cusp of this kind of possibility, but we still may be a century away. One more span of teaching has to be offered, and with the richness of the Bailey teaching already given, one can only imagine what could be given during the next number of years, starting around the year 2025. So we will wait, and meanwhile assimilate what we can, the general structure of the knowledge, and when details of an occult nature are given to us later, the fact that we've done the requisite study and meditation preliminarily will be a great advance, will be a method of hastening the process at that time, when the occult details are given. So then going on, DK says, you ask, just what is the point at which these groups may now begin to work with color? You see, people are so eager. Of course, they want to apply whatever knowledge is even hinted at. They want to do rather than study in a more thorough manner so that their doing has the best effect. The thing that lies ahead to be mastered and done is to develop the knowledge necessary anent the etheric, to inculcate the building of pure bodies, and to study the effect of different colors on the dense physical. So that's sort of the second of the points made just above, the use of exoteric color upon the dense physical. But the etheric is the intermediary, and it can carry all manner of different energies. And if the physical is to be reached, it has to be it has to pass through the etheric. The energies that will reach the physical have to pass through the etheric. It's interesting how we use an adjective and it becomes a noun, you know. It's usually the etheric body, but people get tired of saying body, so it just turns out to be the etheric or the physical or the astral, you know, that kind of thing. It has been but little studied as yet. I'm told, though, that in China, the tradition is there and the experts are to be found. It will be found that certain colors will definitely affect certain diseases, cure certain nervous troubles, eradicate certain nervous tendencies, tend to the building of new tissues or to the burning out of corruption. Well, those are pretty substantial effects, I would say. But there has to be enough research, and this was 100 years ago, there has to be enough research to prove that these are the effects. And when it says it has been but little studied as yet, even though more study has gone into it, it is still in a condition of material that is insufficiently studied as yet. We do have the entire Aquarian age here, and it will be an age given to the transmission of subtle energies. Well, first of all, their belief in them and detection of them, and then sharing and transmission of them, application of them. And when you look at the moon as the hierarchical ruler, we can see that these energies will be applied on all three levels of the personality. All this must be studied. Well, DK, of course, is the great student, and we can imagine how many centuries he has spent in studying. All this must be studied. Experiments can be made along the line of vitalization and magnetization, which involve direct action on the etheric. And this again will be found hid in the law of vibration and of color. So he indicates, he opens the door, and it's up to the intelligent and hopefully intuitive practitioner to carry out what DK calls these experiments. I mean, I certainly don't know all that has been done, but I know there are practitioners that really are into it. And they have often some connection with the East in the methods of which they are educated. Later, and you know, he's not giving us the date lest we pounce upon it and try to force issues. Later, we can take up with greater detail the work of these healing groups when gathered for meditation. And here I would but add that certain colors have a definite effect, though I can only as yet enumerate three of them and them briefly. So certain colors have certain definite effects. And he seems to give us many colors, but to tell us that reliability rests in only a few of them. At one point, he said, basically, all we can be sure of is the green and the blue. And I suppose the blue is really the indigo blue. Goodness, I don't know how I ever before might have thought that anybody could see anything when the darker colors were not. I think I better get rid of this. So, okay, so here he's going to enumerate 3 colors that have definite effects, but only briefly. He'll just indicate orange stimulates the action of the etheric body. It removes congestion and increases the flow of prana. And the only way for me to indicate this in orange is to change the text to orange. Now, he does actually tell us that we must eat oranges, and he even repeats the word, oranges above all oranges. Stimulation, and he gives meditations where the individual student stands at the window and imagines the indrawing of the orange color, the orange vitality. So it seems that vitalization, what have we got here basically? Vitalization, removal of congestion, and stimulation of pranic flow. Rose acts upon the nervous system and tends to vitalization and to the removal of depression and symptoms of debilitation. It increases the will to live. This could be so useful for some. The rose color, increasing the will to live. I'm not sure whether that's rose or pink, but it's the closest thing we have to it. Hope to see. All right. Rose acts upon the nervous system and tends to vitalization. It is a color associated with the solar plexus chakra and with the astral plane in general. So it must uplift the emotions and rids us of debilitation. It increases the will to live. Why that may be so, well, one day we'll know. Green has a general healing effect and can be safely used in all cases of inflammation and fever. But it is almost impossible as yet to provide the right conditions for the application of this color or to arrive at the adequate shade. Maybe I've been using the word hue instead of shade, or maybe they are close enough to be equivalent. That's what I've meant when I say hue. It is one of the basic colors to be used eventually in the healing of the dense physical body, being the color of the note of nature. He tells us, as we may remember, that there is a great green deva who is imparting to certain physicians certain practices in healing which are beneficial. And maybe a violet deva also. Okay, let's see if I can get this to be Correct. Right. So basically, orange, rose, and green. That's what he has given us. That's it. But the general healing effect. And, imagine the day when green will be used instead of aspirin to bring down a fever, if the fever is dangerously high, because, as we know, fevers are sometimes useful in burning away the difficult, the microorganisms, and the bacterial causes, maybe viral causes too. And that's the question of the adequate shade. I'm familiar with one of the healers who had a great success in her practice, and she would often speak of spring green. But of course, there's deeper shades of green also exist. And, all of this will have to be tabulated, categorized, maybe, which is the reason to have that scribe as part of the healing team. So green, and I'm just going to make those letters big enough to really be noticed for the sake of memory, and orange, which in general stimulates the etheric body, and removing congestion. So many diseases are caused by congestion, and they result in congestions in the outer frame. So I don't quite have the nice orange highlighter, but there we go. Anyway. And if we need vitalization, well, the flow of prana can be induced. So internally, we might practice with these colors when under certain afflictions. I think we can practice with ourselves first. This seems to you sketchy and inadequate, he says. So it is, even more so than you can grasp. But forget not that which I have often told you, that in the following up of brief hints lies the path which leads to the source of all knowledge. We just have to recognize a hint when we encounter it. What is a hint for us? And then it will be something that provokes our interest, and we will want to know more about it. And so that's what's called following it up. Okay. Okay. So we now, this appears to be the last in this section, and then we'll look into the future, but maybe on another program. Let's see. We now come to the final part of our thoughts on the use of color in meditation. What a promising field. But as usual, to avoid disaster, careful study, patience, all these things required. We have dealt with the matter in such a way that if the hints that are scattered throughout the communication are adequately followed up, they will form the basis of certain inevitable conclusions. These conclusions will eventually prove to be the postulates upon which the newer schools of medicine will base the continuance of their work. Okay. We have to follow the hints. All right. But first of all, we have to recognize the hints to be followed. Okay, I think I had a little interference there from a errant Skype call. Sorry if that recorded. Anyway, we have to follow the hints. We have to recognize the hints to be followed, and then there will be conclusions, and then there will be postulates based upon those conclusions. So I will just kind of list these factors. Hints, recognition of hints, following hints, conclusions reached, and postulates formed on the basis of the conclusions. So, how shall we sum up the imparted data under definite statements? Okay. That the basic colors of the personality must be transmuted into the colors of the triad or the threefold spirit, which is why the spiritual triad is called spiritual. And this is affected by truly occult meditation. So this is the sequence here. So a summation is being made in these points. And occult meditation affects this, affects or brings about this process. That the colors with which the beginner will be primarily concerned are orange, rose, and green. Okay, so let's just, why not make them into, so they stand out, the appropriate the appropriate color. Okay, here's your orange, and here's our rose, somewhere here, maybe that, perhaps, and here is green. I'm doing it a little differently here. Yeah. That the violet ray holds the secret for this immediate cycle, and we might say a cycle of approximately 2,500 years, and maybe 25,000 years. That the next point of apprehended knowledge will be the laws governing the etheric body. We will say, as might be expected in an age when a sign, Aquarius, which rules the etheric body, is in power. Gemini too. Those two signs particularly are connected with the etheric body, and thus Mercury and Uranus. That the development of the intuition comes, that in the development of the intuition comes cognizance of the esoteric colors, which the exoteric veil. So the intuition penetrates from the exoteric to the esoteric. And therefore, in all matters of occultism, the intuition is indispensable. That color is the form and force of virtue in the occult sense, in the inner life. In other words, through color, virtue streams. And color is a form through which virtue, a strength, is virtue is transmitted. All right. I have summed up the practical points requiring immediate attention for the purposes of clarification. It's always good, isn't it, when after reading through a welter of material, a summary comes along to make the points. All of us as teachers should remember that. That is being demonstrated here for us. With this as the basis of study, the student may expect eventually to see the complete transformation of the type of work done both by the schools of medicine and by chairs of psychology. So, and already I think if we could follow it, we were not alive in this incarnation anyway, in 1920, or we'd be, 100 years old, and I don't know if any of us are. But there have been changes, definitely. And there has been progress, but the progress is more noted by those whose vision spans centuries and not so much by those who are living through the daily experience. Certain prophecies I may here make, which you can note down for the benefit of those who may come after. Now that's an interesting phrase. You can note down for the benefit of those who come after. Okay. Well, we certainly are trying to impart this, and maybe we're looking at a way of condensing the teaching so that it is more easily applied. What are these forecasts? Forecasts anent the future. I think, I will simply go on here. The phraseology of the medical schools will more and more be based on vibration and will be expressed in terms of sound and color. This is something we expect, and we also expect from esoteric healing, bringing forth some of the ancient methods, that this fourth ray method of working with sound and color will be one of the first accessible to the practitioners in the medical field, but also those interested in the healing arts. So, okay. The religious teaching of the world and the inculcation of virtue will likewise be imparted in terms of color. So when we want to develop a virtue, we will work with color. And even now, I think we can begin to do that. People will eventually be grouped under their ray color, probably the soul ray at first. And this will be possible as the human race develops the faculty of seeing auras. And we might say that this is already on the way. The number of clairvoyants is already greater than is realized owing to the reticence of the true psychic. So people will be grouped under their ray color. And when the human race can see auras with accuracy, this will come about. Okay. And already this is happening, and so certainly in the last 100 years, it must have developed. Let's see what we have here. Yeah. The science of numbers being in reality the science of color and sound will also somewhat change its phraseology, and colors will eventually supersede figures. We seem to even have this in chemistry at the present time. So the science of numbers being in reality the science of color and sound, because frequencies determine the color and the sound, and in that way, quantification is qualification, we might say. Okay, quantification is qualification, or quantity is quality. The laws that govern the erection of large buildings and the handling of great weights will someday be understood in terms of sound, as in the past, though the methods were withdrawn. You sometimes wonder when we look at those ancient pyramids, some of them 70,000 years old, not just 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 years old, how those great masses of rock were lifted. Of course, if we go back even further, we'll find giant human beings who maybe could participate in the lifting, but it's pretty well a question of sound. And that will be considered, of course, miraculous, even though in ancient days it was common. The cycle returns, and in days to come will be seen the reappearance of the faculty of the Lemurians and early Atlanteans to raise great masses, this time on a higher turn of the spiral. Okay. So, the Cyclopean architecture was due to the knowledge that was still in their possession before it faded out, perhaps mercifully. mental comprehension of the method will be developed. Maybe in those days, they just knew the formulas. Perhaps people in those days simply knew the formulas without greater mental understanding. They were raised through the ability of the early builders to create a vacuum through sound and to utilize it for their own purposes. So, you know, today, in our scientific estimation of the building process used in ancient days is not accurate and seems fanciful, you know. Sometimes we see just lines and lines of slaves under the lash, pulling great masses of stone up an incline. Something far different than that was extant with the true Cyclopean architecture. Destruction, it will be shown or shewn, we don't use that form so much anymore, can be brought about by the manipulation of certain colors and by the employment of united sound. In this way, terrific effects will be achieved. And we are reminded of the biblical story of Joshua, who knew something, you know, the former Master Jesus, and he had his armies circle the walls of Jericho in that great attack to acquire the so-called Promised Land. That was certainly symbolic of methods used and actual as well. And as the spiritual tells us, the song, the walls came tumbling down. Color can destroy just as it can heal. Sound can disrupt just as it can bring about cohesion. In these two thoughts lie hid the next step for the science of the immediate future. Well, these are great prophecies, and it's been, I think, too early yet for their enactment, for their manifestation. Maybe we're used to the idea that sound is more destructive, but what about color? The manipulation of certain colors, one after another, together, by what method? All of this to be revealed when humanity can be trusted with the revelation. The laws of vibration are going to be widely studied and comprehended. And the use of this knowledge of vibration on the physical planes will bring about many interesting developments. They will be partially an outgrowth of the study of the war and its effect, psychological and otherwise. And will this be, you know, what war? A future war? Well, a war studied from the Akashic record. Now, this was written before the Great Wars. Well, the continuation of the Great War took place, and It was too early yet for the study of what had transpired in the First World War. But anyway, the law of vibration and great destruction has occurred. I'm told by one of my friends who was told by his father, who was a soldier in the Second World War, that hidden behind a wall was a family at dinner. The wall fell down, and the family, all of whom were dead, fell to pieces because of the effect of the huge sound of the guns. I hope I'm relaying that in a proper manner. It was a kind of a ghastly thought, but the sound had definitely destroyed the vehicle. More was affected by the sound of the great guns, for instance, than by the impact of the projectile on the physical plane. Sometimes you look up those guns, even in the First World War, they were simply huge. They were mounted on railroad tracks. They could travel miles and miles. And that kind of shelling continued in the Second World War. The Russian attack on Berlin was largely at first an artillery attack, and it was carried on from a great distance. But we have to take DK's word for it that the vibratory effect was really the great thing. These effects are as yet practically unrecognized and are largely etheric and astral. So we are playing now in war with great forces, and we hardly know the effects that we have been causing. But all of this will be coming to light. All becoming to light. Okay. Now, music will be largely employed in construction. Well, any composer knows there is a great act of construction in preparing a good piece of music. The form of the music, the phrases, the silences, the rhythm. Music will be largely employed in construction, and in 100 years from now, it will be a feature in certain work of a constructive nature. Well, 100 years has now passed, so let's see. But of course, there was the maybe unnecessary precipitation of the second phase of the war. This sounds to you utterly impossible, but it will simply be the utilization of ordered sound to achieve certain ends. There was a man, I remember him speaking, he's passed on now, quite long ago, but he wrote a book called Prophecy on Trial. So he had detected a number of the prophecies which had not occurred, but and he seemed to take a rather negative stance about them, as if they were not going to occur, but I think he was mistaken. The timing of the precipitation of the prophecies is what is variable, and I don't know if he was against certain currents, but shortly after writing the book, he died. So Well, let us not judge the Tibetan in terms of earthly time. He will give us certain figures at times, but humanity has the ability to intervene and offset those expectations. Let's see what we have here. Yeah, we're almost to letter 8. You will ask, what place has all this in a series of letters on meditation? Simply this, that the method employed in the utilization of color and sound in healing, in promoting spiritual growth, and in exoteric construction on the physical plane, and I suppose destruction too, and will be based on the laws that govern the mental body, and will be forms of meditation. Only as the race develops the dynamic powers and attributes of thought, which powers are the product of meditation rightly pursued, will the capacity to make use of the laws of vibration be objectively possible. So, our conventional idea of what meditation is being corrected here. What place has all this in a series of letters on meditation? So, meditation is a mental activity at first, and later it's followed by contemplation, an aspect of meditation, and by inspiration, and by initiation and eventual identification. But the laws that govern the mental body, all of these approaches, all of these methods will be forms of meditation, So, in fact, all of these developments are undertaken through meditation. They'll all be based on the laws of the mental body, and they will be achieved through different forms of meditation, and thus they do belong here as a consideration. And then think not that only the religious devotee or mystic, or the man imbued with what we call higher teaching, is the exponent of the powers attained in meditation. This is an idea he repeats at various times throughout the books, and it is a very inclusive idea and helps as a bridge into his teaching for those who are not along the second sixth-ray line. All great capitalists and the supreme heads of finance or organized business, third and seventh-ray types, let's say, are the exponents of similar powers. They are personifications of one-pointed adherence to one line of thought, and their evolution parallels that of the mystic or the occultist. So something to bear in mind. It has to do also with the assessment of what is spiritual, which is a much broader type of assessment in Master DK's work than in many of the so-called spiritual presentations. I seek most strongly to emphasize that fact. They are the ones who meditate along the line of the Mahachohan, seventh ray soul, third ray monad, okay, or the Lord of civilization or culture. and I'll just put that in, third ray monad and seventh ray soul. Supreme concentrated attention to the matter in hand makes them what they are, and in many respects, they attain greater results than many a student of meditation. All they need to do is to transmute the motive underlying their work, and their achievement will then outrun that of the other students. They will approach a point of synthesis, and the probationary path will then be trodden. Well, as I say, when students along these lines will read the Tibetans' work, they will recognize their meditative powers in such statements. And DK will present the vision, the desirable vision, the ideal, and they may be remotivated away from the kind of materialism which has captured their attention for the most part, but let's say among the highest of them, decreasingly so. The law of vibration, it's a first-ray systemic law, will gradually therefore be more and more understood and will be seen to govern action in all three departments of the Manu, the World Teacher, and the Mahachohan. So, the law of vibration, first subplane, basically, and the World Teacher associated with second subplane, basically, and the Mahachohan, the third, the plane of Brahma, basically. So whether those are smaller subplanes or the cosmic subplanes on the cosmic physical plane, it makes no difference. They are governed by different aspects of the law of vibration associated with the three great lords, Manu, World Teacher, Mahachohan. And this law of vibration, I don't know, since it's connected with the first subplane, and basically solar systemically with the logoic plane, maybe we can put it in red. It's just, these are just little triggers to, trigger the mind into thinking of an association which is true and useful. So it will find its basic expression in its familiar terminology, in those of color and sound. So let's just say the law of vibration will be expressed in terminology related to color and sound. Okay, going on here. Emotional disorder will be regarded as discordant sound. I've had an experience like that once, You wonder, well, I've had very few nightmares in my life, but I once had one nightmare and I opened the door and there was nothing there but a horrible sound, which I think I promptly closed the door. I can't remember exactly. It was a very long time ago, but sound can convey much about the quality of the energy. Emotional disorder will be regarded as discordant sound. Mental lethargy will be expressed in terms of low vibration, and physical disease will be numerically considered. Maybe not in ways that we can yet appreciate. But frequencies seem to rule everything, and the quality of what occurs has to do with concordant waves and interfering waves of sound. And I suppose, putting in terms of color, color clashes, if you will. All constructive work, remember, again, what did he say? The right kind of music will eventually be expressed in terms of numbers, by colors and through sound. So, as in the Treatise on Cosmic Fire, we have a sequence called vibration, light, sound, color. Light is not yet figured into the sequence, but basically light is matter, at least Kabbalistically so. And the whole universe is made of light, differently condensed, we might say. This suffices on this matter, and at this juncture I have not further to communicate, but plenty to communicate later, of course. The subject is abstruse and difficult, and only by patient brooding will the darkness lighten. Only by patient brooding. You know, that kind of second ray activity where you kind of ponder over something and as if you were waiting for something to hatch, you know. Abstruse and difficult, the subject, and only by patient brooding will the darkness lighten. We cannot rush into it with a concrete mind and say, now we shall learn everything really quickly, the way you could with more concrete and exoteric types of knowledge. Only when the ray of intuition strikes athwart the pall of darkness, and that's not an idly chosen word, it's a cross. A cross is indicated, which pall is the ignorance that hides all knowledge, the nascence that hides all knowledge, the one great sin in Buddhism, ignorance. Will the forms that veil the subjective life be irradiated and known? And we say, from the form to the causative energy. Only when the light of reason is dimmed by the radiant sun of wisdom, so the lower concrete mind testimony dimmed by that which the soul reveals and which the spiritual triad and monad reveal, will all things be seen in their just proportions. Of course, it requires humility and a adjusted sense of right proportion. This desirable achievement requires humility, which is an adjusted sense of right proportion. And will the forms assume their exact colors, just as now we do not have exact tones vibratorily attuned to the higher sources of virtue, and their numerical vibration be known. Well, that's been a long subject that we have been studying, and the next one is long also, taking us some 43 pages, looks like. And then comes the material on the new schools. I haven't decided yet how to deal with that because I have an exact compilation written. But maybe, you know, in this more improvisational method, other things will arise, and it is a subject of great interest. So, friends, as you can see, I've imported one of these stopping and beginning points. We are completed then with program 49, which we will get to you as soon as it is converted. And it has been given on November the 10th, 2020. And we've gone 9 pages in it, up to page 253, and we'll begin with program 50, which will take us from page 253 onward. And I don't know what day in November, whether tomorrow, but not tonight, I think. I think I should not mix the streams. This is very different, what's coming up about them. And I remember from long ago when I read this that it was not an easy section, and that ideas were offered which were difficult and even in some ways more difficult than later ideas given about the masters. So we've been studying the spiritual numerals, you know, vibrations, sound, color, certain forms that can be used in meditation to achieve certain points of tension. And it's just been filled with hints which can be followed out. And 100 years has passed, and you kind of wonder how much of this kind of very exacting knowledge has been followed out. So many things have appeared on color and sound, but they seem not sufficiently exacting, inaccurate, in fact, maybe tending in a direction by means of which discovery can be found, but somehow not the kind of occult science that DK would hope to see established. Yet we have to proceed as we can, and we cannot expect that the fruit of the hint will appear immediately. You can pretty well see that following out hints in a book like this, one could spend one's whole incarnation. But he has given elaborative amplification to what is said here in the other books. Some of these books at first are seed books, every one of them really. Letters on Occult Meditation, Initiation Human and Solar, A Treatise on Cosmic Fire. They are all seed books for what he developed later, subject by subject, except in the matter of sound and color. The great majority of material is found here in Letters on Occult Meditation. There are other seeds which he really did amplify in future books. So, a great gift, as I repeat so often, a great gift has been given, and the opportunity for assimilation is with us if we recognize the value of the gift and what assimilation can bring. Under such recognitions, we will be properly motivated and inching forward, step by step, or climbing the ladder rung by rung. We will manage to bring home to our consciousness a fuller revelation of that which lurks just beneath the surface, but which has been so far, for people like us, undetected. So, okay, let us go on to the next letter on the next occasion that we find ourselves together. I'm glad I had a little chance today. This election of 2020 has kept me very occupied with certain practical yet esoteric matters. So lots of love and many blessings from all of us on the communications team, and especially from Tuya and myself, who try to keep everything flowing so that you can come closer and closer to, and we too, to absorbing and applying the great teaching. We'll see you on the next occasion, whenever that will be, hopefully soon. Okay, bye-bye for now.